The grand hall of the St. Cecilia Conservatory was a tomb for dead dreams, or at least that's how Leo felt by 4 in the afternoon. The air, usually smelling of polished wood and old paper, now stank of desperation and sheep rosin. He slumped in the front row seat, fingers pinching the bridge of his nose. Another open audition day, another parade of hopefuls who believed wanting it badly was the same as talent. His assistant, a young woman named Anya with endless patience he did not share, consulted her clipboard. That was the last scheduled one, Leo. Thank every saint there is, he muttered, his voice rough. My ears need a bath. Did you hear that last soprano? She hit a note that could shatter glass. My glass, my sanity. Anya smiled thinly. She was nervous. This means a lot to people. It means a lot to us, Leo corrected, waving a hand at the magnificent stage with its gleaming Steinway concert grand. This is a legacy, not a consolation prize. He stood up, stretching his stiff back. All right, lock up. I'm going to find a very strong coffee. But as he grabbed his jacket, a side door to the auditorium creaked open. Anya's uncle, the head stagehand, a man named Joseph with kind eyes and grease under his nails, peered in. He looked sheepish. Director Leo? A moment? Leo held back a sigh. Joseph, we're finished for the day. I know, Joseph said, stepping in fully. He was followed by a boy. The boy was small, maybe 12, wearing a clean but faded blue sweater and trousers that were a bit too short. His hair was dark and a little too long, and he kept his gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of his trainers. He looked utterly out of place in the gilded hall. This is my sister's boy, Joseph said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy didn't look up. He's staying with me for a while. He loves music. Listens to it all day on my old radio. When he heard about the auditions, Leo's patience, already a thin thread, snapped. Joseph, no. The auditions are closed. The list was finalized weeks ago. We've heard 43 people today. My brain is full. Just one song, Joseph pleaded, his face earnest. 2 minutes. For me. As a favor. Anya shot Leo a look that said, be kind. Leo felt trapped. He liked Joseph. The man kept the ancient heating system alive. But this was too much. He looked at the boy, who finally glanced up. His eyes were a quiet, dark gray, and held no spark of pleading or excitement. Just a kind of stillness. He wasn't clutching violin case. No flute box. Nothing. What's his instrument? Leo asked, his tone flat. Joseph gently nudged the boy forward a step. The piano, he said softly. A snort escaped Leo before he could stop it. He looked from the boy's small, rough hands that looked like they helped with chores, maybe scraped rust off pipes in Joseph's workshop, to the majestic 9-foot Steinway on stage. It was an emperor of an instrument, a machine for giants and geniuses. The contrast was so absurd it was almost funny. The piano, Leo repeated, letting the words hang in the quiet hall. He walked a few steps closer, looking down at the boy. You play the piano? The boy gave a single, nearly imperceptible nod, his eyes drifting back to the floor. And what will you play for us? Something by Mozart? A little sonatina? The boy said nothing. He just looked at the stage. Leo felt a familiar, hot wave of cynicism wash over him. This was the final straw of a long, grating day. A stagehand's nephew, with no preparation, no instrument, expecting to just wander in and touch the crown jewel of the conservatory. It was disrespectful. To the instrument, to the process, to the art itself. He turned to Anya, his voice deliberately loud, wanting to make a point, to end this charisma. You see, Anya, this is what I mean. Everyone thinks it's easy. Just bang on the keys. How hard can it be? He gestured dramatically toward the boy. Him? Look at those hands. They're good, honest hands, sure. For fixing a sink. Not for this. He could see Joseph's face fall, a flush of embarrassment creeping up the man's neck. The boy, however, didn't flinch. He just kept staring at the piano, as if in a trance. Leo, carried away by his own performance, pointed a finger at the polished wooden stage floor. I tell you what, he announced, his voice echoing in the space. If he can really play that piano, really play it, not just poke at it, I'll kneel right here on this spot. A tense, awkward silence followed. Anya looked horrified. Joseph looked pained. A few other stragglers, a janitor at the back, a student packing up sheet music in the balcony, paused to watch the scene. Leo felt a twinge of guilt. He'd gone too far, mocking a child to prove a point to no one but himself. But the words were out, hanging in the air like a challenge. He crossed his arms, expecting the boy to shrink back, to hide behind his uncle, to run from the room. He didn't. The boy, still silent, looked once at his uncle. Joseph, after a second's hesitation, gave a small, encouraging nod. Then the boy walked. Not to the steps at the side, but directly to the short set of stairs leading up from the auditorium floor to the stage. His movements were slow, deliberate, like someone walking toward a cliff's edge. Leo watched, his cynicism now mixed with a prickling curiosity. The boy's quiet confidence was unnerving. He reached the Steinway. He didn't touch it right away. He stood beside the bench for a long moment, just looking at the keyboard, his head tilted slightly. It wasn't the look of a nervous child. It was the look of someone recognizing an old friend. Then he pulled out the bench. It scraped softly on the stage. He climbed onto it. He was so small his feet didn't quite touch the pedals. He sat there, his back very straight, his small, rough hands hovering just above the pristine ivory keys. Leo held his breath without meaning to. The entire hall was frozen. The janitor had stopped pushing his broom. The student in the balcony was leaning over the railing. The boy closed his eyes. He took a deep, slow breath that seemed to fill his entire small frame. And then he began. The silence in the hall was so complete that Leo could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator in the staff lounge down the hall. It was a thick, waiting silence. He stood with his arms still crossed, watching the small boy on the giant bench. He expected a clumsy plink of a key, maybe a halting, one-fingered rendition of Chopsticks. He was already mentally drafting his exit, a slightly softer dismissal to soothe his own conscience. The boy's hands didn't fall onto the keys. They floated down, like two birds landing on separate branches. His left hand settled in the lower register, his right higher up. For a second, nothing. Then he pressed. It wasn't a note. It was a sound. A deep, complex chord that seemed to bloom from the piano's belly. It wasn't loud, but it was incredibly rich, a cluster of notes that vibrated in the air long after his fingers had lifted. It was a dark, questioning, and profoundly sad sound. It hung there, shimmering, before fading into the quiet. Leo felt his eyebrows draw together. That was not a beginner's chord. It was specific, intentional, and harmonically advanced. A fluke, he thought. A lucky press. But then the boy's right hand moved. It began a slow, aching melody, just a simple line of single notes that wound its way through the lingering echo of the chord. It was beautiful in a lonely, lost kind of way. The left hand followed, not with simple accompaniment, but with another layer of melody, a counterpoint that wove around the right hand's tune, creating a conversation of sadness. Leo's arms slowly uncrossed. He didn't realize he was doing it. He just stood there, listening. The music was slow, like a funeral march for something small and precious. It was deeply expressive, each note given space to breathe and ache. The boy's technique was clean, precise. His rough-looking fingers curved with a natural, relaxed grace over the keys. Then something shifted. The tempo picked up, just a fraction. The left hand broke into a restless, rippling pattern like water over stones. The right hand's melody became more urgent, climbing higher, the notes becoming sharper, more insistent. It was technically demanding now, that left-hand pattern requiring independent control and even rhythm. A cold trickle, like a drop of ice water, ran down Leo's spine. He knew this. He knew this music. Not from a book, not from a recording he'd heard often. From a memory, old and tucked away in a dusty corner of his mind. He was no longer in the St. Cecilia auditorium. He was 17 again, a scholarship student, skinny and full of awe, hiding in the dark at the back of this very hall. It was late at night, and the only light was a single lamp on the piano. The man at the keyboard wasn't a teacher. He was a ghost, a rumor given form. Elias, the genius who had vanished from the music world years before Leo even arrived. That night, Elias had played something new, something he was writing. He'd called it Lamentum. A lament. He'd played only a fragment, maybe 5 minutes of it, before stopping abruptly, closing the fallboard, and disappearing into the shadows without a word. Leo had never forgotten it. The piece was never published. Elias vanished for good not long after. The music died with him. Until now, this boy, this child in a faded sweater, was playing it. Not just the notes, but the feel of it. The same touch, a certain way of softening a phrase that made your heart clutch. The same tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation before a climactic chord. The same way he leaned his body into the keys during the passionate sections. Leo's mouth had gone dry. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He took a slow, careful step forward, then another, as if afraid to scare off a rare animal. He looked at the boy's face. His eyes were closed, his brow slightly furrowed, not in effort, but in feeling. He wasn't reading music. He was remembering it. He was living inside it. The music swelled. The boy's small hands were a blur now, flying across the keyboard in a cascade of notes that sounded like a storm of tears. It was furious, virtuosic, a torrent of emotion that seemed impossible to contain in such a small person. The power coming from the piano filled the hall, shaking the light fixtures, vibrating in Leo's chest. He glanced at the others. Anya's clipboard was forgotten, hanging at her side, her hand over her mouth. Joseph had tears streaming openly down his weathered cheeks, watching his nephew as if seeing him for the first time. The janitor was frozen, leaning on his broom. The student in the balcony had both hands on the railing, his head bowed as if in prayer. Leo looked back at the boy. He saw it now, not the rough hands, but the shape of them. The angle of the wrist, the slope of the shoulders as he leaned into the instrument. It was an echo, a hauntingly perfect echo. The furious storm of notes broke, collapsing back into that original, haunting, simple melody. But it was changed now, weary, carrying the weight of awe that had come before. The boy played the final phrases, each note a world of sorrow, until there were just 2 notes left, a hollow interval that hung in the air, unresolved, a question without an answer. His hands lifted. The last vibration faded into silence, a deeper silence than before, because now the hall was empty of everything but the memory of the sound. The boy opened his eyes. He didn't look at Leo or at his tearful uncle. He didn't smile or bow. He simply looked up, past the bright stage lights, to the empty, dark balcony at the back of the hall. He stared there for a long moment, his face calm, expectant, as if waiting for a sign. For approval from the shadows. Then, slowly, he slid off the bench. The spell was broken. A shuddering breath came from Anya. Joseph wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. The student in the balcony started a slow, solitary clap that echoed once before he stopped, seeming to realize it wasn't enough. Leo couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The sarcastic words he'd spoken just minutes before, "If he can really play that piano, I'll kneel right here on this spot," echoed in his head, not as a joke anymore, but as a monumental, stupid mistake. He had not just heard a talented child. He had witnessed a ghost walking. He had heard a piece of music history, thought lost forever, breathed back to life by a pair of small, rough hands. The boy finally turned his head and looked directly at Leo. His gray eyes were clear and calm. In them, Leo saw no triumph, no gloating, no childish pride. Just a quiet knowledge, as if the boy had simply done what he came to do. And now it was done. Leo realized he was standing exactly on the spot he had pointed to, the spot where he'd promised to kneel. The polished wood seemed to glow under his feet, accusing him. His face felt hot. His professional pride, his cynicism, his entire worldview of what talent looked and sounded like, lay in shattered pieces around him. All that was left was the music, still ringing in his ears, and a silent, waiting boy on the stage. The silence after the final note was a living thing. It pressed in on Leo's ears, heavy and full. For a few heartbeats, nobody moved. The boy just stood there by the piano bench, his small figure looking even smaller under the vast, empty stage lights. He finally blinked, breaking his gaze away from the dark balcony, and looked down at his own hands, as if surprised by what they had just done. It was Joseph who broke the spell. He let out a wet, choked sound, a mix of a sob and a laugh, and hurried up the side steps to the stage. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his nephew in a tight hug, burying his face in the boy's hair. The boy stood still for a moment, then slowly brought his arms up to pat his uncle's back, a gesture that was both childish and strangely mature. The movement snapped Leo into action. He wasn't a feeling man, not openly. He dealt in notes, in technique, in cold, hard judgment. What had just happened was a tidal wave of feeling, and it terrified him. He turned on his heel, his shoes making a sharp sound on the wooden floor. "My office." "Now," he said, his voice rough. He didn't specify who he was talking to, but he threw the words over his shoulder at Anya and Joseph. He couldn't look at the boy. He walked out of the auditorium, down the plush-carpeted hallway, his mind a roaring static. Fragments of the music, that music played on a loop in his head, alongside his own mocking voice. Asterisk, look at those hands. "I'll kneel right here." Asterisk, he felt sick. His office was a mess of stacked scores, coffee cups, and a fine layer of dust on everything but the grand piano in the corner. He went straight to the window, staring out at the brick wall of the next building without seeing it. A minute later, Anya ushered Joseph and the boy in. Joseph's arm was still around his nephew's shoulders. The boy looked around the crowded room, his eyes lingering on the shelves of books, the framed concert posters, the silent piano. "Close the door," Leo said, still facing the window. He heard the soft click. He took a deep breath, trying to find the director, the critic, the man in charge. When he turned, his face was a careful mask. But his eyes went straight to the boy. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone softer than he'd used in the hall, but still all business. The boy looked at his uncle. "He doesn't speak much," Joseph said, his voice hoarse from emotion. "Hasn't for about a year now. Not a word." Leo digested this. A mute prodigy. Of course. It felt like a detail from a sentimental story, not real life. "Can he write it?" Joseph nodded, fished in his pocket, and pulled out a small, worn notebook and a pencil. He handed them to the boy. The boy took them, opened to a clean page, and wrote carefully. He held it up. Macaw, Macaw, Leo repeated. The name fit him. How old are you, Mikhail? The boy wrote again. 12. And who taught you to play like that? Mikhail's pencil hovered. He looked at his uncle again, a question in his eyes. Joseph gave a small, helpless shrug, as if to say, You can tell him. Mikhail bent and wrote a single word. He held it up for a long time. Grandfather. The ice water trickled down Leo's spine, returned, this time as a flood. His mouth felt dry again. He walked slowly to his desk, needing to sit, but he didn't. He leaned against it, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Your grandfather. What was his name? Mikhail wrote. He showed the paper. Henry, a common name. Too common. Leo pushed. Henry what? What was his full name? Joseph shifted uncomfortably. My sister married late. Her husband's father. We never met him much. A quiet man, kept to himself. He passed last year. That's when. Well, that's when Mikhail came to stay with me. And stopped talking. His name, Leo insisted, his eyes locked on Mikhail. The name he was born with. Mikhail stared back. There was no defiance in his look, just a deep, calm knowing. He understood what Leo was asking. Slowly, he turned to a fresh page. He wrote not with the quick scribble of a child, but with deliberate, practiced strokes. He wrote a name that Leo had not seen written in over 20 years. A name spoken in whispers in these very halls as a legend and a tragedy. He held up the notebook, Elias Vogler. The air left Leo's lungs in a rush. He heard Anya gasp behind him. He had known somehow, from the first few bars of the lamentum, but seeing the name in the boy's careful handwriting made it real. It made it undeniable. Elias, Leo whispered. The ghost had a name, and now he had a grandson. The pieces crashed together. The disappearance. The rumors of a man broken by some private sorrow, living under another name. The music locked away in his mind, or in a drawer somewhere. And this boy, watching, listening, absorbing it all in silence. He lived with your grandfather? Leo asked, his voice barely audible. Mikhail nodded. He pointed to the piano in the corner of the office, then to his own ears. He listened, Joseph interpreted softly. My sister said the old man played for hours. Every day. That was their whole world in that little apartment. Just the two of them and the piano. And the piece he played today? The lamentum? Did your grandfather finish it? Mikhail's face clouded. He shook his head slowly, no. Then he made a flowing motion with his hand, like water, and then a cutting motion. He pointed again to his ears and to his heart. He had heard fragments, pieces. The unfinished sadness was all he knew. Leo looked at this child, the grandson of the greatest musical mind he had ever encountered. A boy who carried a masterpiece in his head, who spoke through the keys because his voice had left him with his grandfather. All the polished, privileged students he had taught, with their expensive tutors and their perfect pedigrees, and the greatest raw talent he had ever witnessed, and then sitting in a maintenance worker's apartment, listening to a ghost, he thought of his own words in the hall. The dare, the utter, complete arrogance of it. He had judged a book by its cover, and the cover had been a faded sweater and rough hands. Inside was a library of lost music. Does he read music? Anya asked, finding her voice. Mikhail shook his head again. He pointed to his temple. He played by ear, by memory. By heart. Leo finally sank into his desk chair. The springs creaked. He looked from Joseph's worried, proud face to Mikhail's serene one. The boy wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't looking for a scholarship. He had played because the piano was there, and the music was inside him, asking to come out. It was that simple, and that profound. "What happens now, director?" Joseph asked, his voice tentative. He was a practical man. He saw a miracle, but he also saw a boy who needed to eat, to sleep, to have a future. Leo didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the spot on the floor where he had stood when he made his promise. The promise he now had to keep, not because of the bet, but because of what the bet had revealed. He had been ready to dismiss a miracle. He had scoffed at a legacy. He looked at Mikhail. "Your grandfather," Leo began, choosing his words with more care than he ever had. He was the reason I do this. The reason I wanted music to be my life. Hearing him play once, a long time ago, it changed everything for me." Mikhail listened, his gray eyes fixed on Leo's face. "And today," Leo said, the words thick in his throat, "you gave that back to me. You didn't just play the piano, Mikhail. You brought him back into this room." The boy seemed to understand. He gave a single slow nod. For the first time, a very small, very quiet smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a smile of recognition, of shared loss, and of a secret finally told not in that moment. Leo the director vanished. The cynic was gone. All that was left was a man humbled to his core by a truth he could never have imagined, sitting silently in a worn blue sweater in the middle of his messy office. The journey into the music was over. Now the harder journey. What to do with it, and with the boy who carried it, was just beginning. The silence in the office stretched, filled now with a different kind of weight. It wasn't the quiet of an empty room, but the quiet after a revelation, thick with things unsaid. Mikhail's small smile faded back into his usual calm expression, but his eyes stayed on Leo, watching, waiting. Joseph cleared his throat, a sound loud in the stillness. "So, what does this mean, director?" "For Mikhail?" Leo dragged a hand down his face. He felt exhausted, as if he'd just run a long distance. His mind was a jumble. The practical side of him, the administrator, started listing things: scholarships, tutors, auditions for proper programs, media interest. The media would go wild. The lost prodigy's grandson. He could see the headlines, but looking at Mikhail, who was now quietly tracing the grain of the wooden floor with the toe of his trainer, none of that felt right. It felt like noise, like throwing a bucket of paint on a perfect, delicate drawing. "It means," Leo said slowly, "that we need to be very careful." He stood up and walked over to the piano in the corner of his office. It was a good piano, but not like the Steinway on the stage. He lifted the fallboard, revealing the yellowed keys. "Come here, Mikhail." The boy looked at his uncle, who nodded. He walked over and stood beside Leo. "Play something for me," Leo said. "Not your grandfather's music. Anything else. Something you heard on the radio. A song from a film. Anything." Mikhail looked puzzled, but didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the bench, thought for a second, and then began to play. It was a popular tune from a recent cartoon film, bouncy and simple. He played it perfectly, with a little swing in the rhythm that made it fun. But it was just that perfect. It was a copy. There was none of the raw, soul-deep feeling he had poured into the lamentum. When he finished, he looked up at Leo, as if to say, "Asterisk like that?" "Asterisk. That's what you hear," Leo said, turning to Joseph and Anya. "And it's impressive for his age. Perfect pitch, great memory. But that," he pointed a finger toward the auditorium, "what he played out there, that wasn't just playing. That was translation. He was translating a feeling, a memory that isn't even his own, directly into sound. It's a connection so deep, I don't even understand it." He looked back at Mikhail. "The music your grandfather taught you, The way he taught you. It's fragile. If we bring in a bunch of strict teachers right now, with their rules and their scales and their proper technique, we might. We might break that connection. We might turn something alive into just another exercise. Anya spoke softly. But he can't just not learn, Leo. He's 12. He needs structure. An education. I know, Leo said. He started pacing, thinking out loud. But the structure has to fit him, not the other way around. First, we protect him. This story cannot get out. Joseph, you can't tell anyone. Not your sister, not your friends. Do you understand? Joseph's face was serious. He nodded firmly. For Mikhail, yes. Good. Anya, the student in the balcony, the janitor. Have a word. Say it was a special favor for a staff member's child. A one-time thing. Make it sound boring. Nothing to gossip about. What about you? Anya asked. You made a pretty loud promise in front of witnesses. Leo flinched. He had been trying not to think about that. The bet felt childish now, stupid. But a promise was a promise, and it was tied to the moment everything changed. I'll deal with that, he said, though he had no idea how. He stopped pacing and faced Mikhail. Would you like to come here? To this room? Not for a normal lesson, but just to play. To play the music your grandfather left for you. And maybe, if you want, I could be here. To listen. To help you write some of it down, so it's never lost again. Mikhail's eyes lit up. It was the first strong emotion Leo had seen from him besides that deep musical sorrow. He nodded vigorously, yes. And, Leo continued, choosing his words with care, if you ever want to try speaking again, to use words. That's okay too. But the piano can be your voice for as long as you need it to be. A look of profound relief passed over the boy's face. It was as if he'd been carrying a heavy sack, and someone had finally offered to take it from him. He nodded again. Joseph put a hand on Leo's arm. His eyes were shiny. Thank you, Director. You see him. Really see him. Leo felt a pang of shame. He hadn't seen him at all, not at first. He had seen a stereotype, a problem. It was only the music that had forced his eyes open. Over the next few days, a quiet routine began. Every afternoon after the main conservatory classes were finished, Joseph would bring Mikhail to the office. Anya would have a glass of milk and a plate of biscuits waiting. At first, Mikhail would just sit at the piano and play fragments, a few bars of the Lamentum, a folk tune his grandfather used to hum, strange little exercises of his own invention that sounded like wind or rain. Leo would work at his desk, pretending to go over budgets or schedules, but he was really just listening. He learned the boy's rhythms. He played when he was happy, when he was sad, when he was thinking. The piano was his whole inner world, made external. One afternoon, Leo pulled an old, empty manuscript book from a drawer. He brought it to the piano. When you play that part, Leo said, pointing to a repeating, rippling phrase from the Lamentum, what does it sound like inside your head? Can you show me, note by note, slowly? Mikhail looked at the blank lines and spaces, confused. Leo sat beside him on the bench, a tight fit, and took out a pencil. This line is this note, he said, playing a key and making a mark. It was slow, painstaking work. But Mikhail was a fast learner. He began to see the connection between the dots on the page, and the sounds in his mind and under his fingers. It wasn't about teaching him to read music. It was about giving him a tool to preserve what he already knew. They were archaeologists, carefully brushing the dust off a lost treasure, one note at a time. During one of these sessions, as Mikhail was puzzling over how to write down a tricky chord, he suddenly went very still. He looked toward the office door, which was slightly ajar. What is it? Leo asked, but Mikhail didn't answer. He slid off the bench, walked to the door, and peered out into the empty hallway. He stood there for a long moment, his head cocked as if listening to something far away. Then he turned back, a faint shadow of disappointment on his face. "He does that sometimes," Joseph said later, when Leo asked about it. "At home, too. He'll just stop and look at the door, or the window, like he's waiting for someone to come in." Leo understood then. The look at the empty balcony after his audition. He wasn't showing off. He was playing for an audience of one. He was playing for his grandfather, hoping in some deep part of his heart that the music would be so right, so true, that it would bring him back. The boy wasn't just carrying Elias Vogler's music. He was carrying his absence. And that, Leo realized, was a weight no child should have to bear alone. His promise, his stupid public bet, wasn't just about admitting he was wrong. It was about something bigger. It was about acknowledging the weight this child carried, and the incredible gift he had offered to a room full of strangers who hadn't deserved it. He knew what he had to do. The thought filled him with a cold dread, but also a strange sense of rightness. He had to go back to the spot where it all began. He had to finish it. Not for his own pride, but for Mikhail. To show him that his music could change things, that it could humble a proud man, that it mattered. The idea wouldn't leave Leo alone. It followed him home, sat with him at his silent dinner table, and echoed in the quiet of his apartment. "I'll kneel right here." The words, once a boast, now felt like a debt. A debt not just of pride, but of respect. Mikhail's music had been a gift, raw and honest, and Leo's response had been a sarcastic joke. To move forward, he had to close that circle. Not privately, but there, on the stage where it happened. He told Anya his plan the next morning. Her eyes went wide. "Are you sure? People will talk. They might think it's a stunt." "Let them talk," Leo said, his voice firm. "It's not for them. It's for him. And for me." He found Joseph in the boiler room, checking gauges. "This afternoon," Leo said, "bring Mikhail to the auditorium at 4. Just him. And you." Joseph wiped his hands on a rag, his expression concerned. "You're going to do it then? The kneeling?" Leo nodded, a tightness in his throat. "I said I would." At 10 minutes to 4, the grand hall was empty. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The stage lights were off. The space felt sacred and still. Leo stood in the center of the stage, on the exact same polished wooden floorboard. He felt like an actor waiting for a play to begin, but he didn't know his lines. The small side door opened. Joseph came in first, giving Leo a nervous nod. Then Mikhail followed. He was wearing the same faded blue sweater. He looked around the vast, silent auditorium, then up at Leo on the stage. His face was a question. "Come up here, Mikhail," Leo said, his voice echoing softly. The boy climbed the steps, his footsteps small sounds in the big space. He stopped a few feet away from Leo, looking up at him with those calm gray eyes. Leo's heart was pounding. He felt foolish. What was he doing? Making a grand gesture for a child who probably didn't care about apologies. But then he thought of the music, the unbearable sadness and beauty of it. He thought of the boy looking at the empty balcony, waiting. He cleared his throat. The words felt clumsy, too big. "A few weeks ago," he began, "you walked into this room. I saw a boy who didn't belong here. I saw clothes that weren't fine enough, and hands that didn't look like they knew these keys." He spoke slowly, making sure Mikhail understood every word. "I was blind, and I was arrogant. I said something cruel. I made a promise I never thought I'd have to keep." Mikhail listened, his head slightly tilted, Then you played, Leo said, and his voice grew stronger, filled with the memory of it. And you didn't just play the piano. You told a story without words. You brought someone back to this hall who had been gone for a very long time. You showed me that music isn't about how you look or where you come from. It's about what you carry inside. And you, Mikhail, carry a whole world inside. He took a deep breath. I said if you could play, I would kneel. That was a joke then. But it's not a joke now. It's the only thing that makes sense. Leo then did the hardest, most honest thing he had done in 20 years. He slowly lowered himself. He bent one knee, then the other, until he was kneeling on the hard, polished wood of the stage. He wasn't looking down. He held Mikhail's gaze. He was not a director humbling himself before a student. He was one man, kneeling in recognition of another's gift. It was a silent, profound apology and a tribute, all in one. Mikhail's eyes widened. He took a small step back, startled. He looked quickly at his uncle in the front row, then back at Leo. He hadn't expected this. The bet was probably forgotten by him, an adult's loud noise from a different day. But he understood the gesture. He understood the respect in it. For a long moment, no one moved. The image was striking. The tall, proud director on his knees before the small, silent boy in the empty theater. Then, Mikhail did something unexpected. He didn't smile. He didn't rush forward to pull Leo up. Instead, his expression became very serious, very focused. He walked past Leo to the piano. He sat on the bench. He paused, his hands in his lap, thinking. Leo stayed where he was, kneeling, watching. Mikhail began to play. But it wasn't the lamentum. It was something new. It started with a few low, quiet notes that sounded like footsteps. Then a single, clear high note, like a light turning on. The music that unfolded was different. It was still sad in places, but there was a new thread woven through it, a thread of warmth, of something gentle and kind. It was simpler, more hesitant than his grandfather's work, but it was unmistakably his own. He was playing what he felt right now. The surprise, the confusion, the strange understanding, and a dawning sense of safety. He was answering Leo's gesture with the only language he had. As the last notes faded, Mikhail turned on the bench to look at Leo. Then he did something even more astonishing. He slid off the bench, walked over, and stood right in front of the kneeling man. He looked down at his own hands for a second, then back up at Leo's face. His lips parted. He took a small, shaky breath, and he spoke. His voice was husky from lack of use, soft as a whisper, but perfectly clear in the silent hall. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. They hit Leo like a physical force. He felt a hot sting behind his eyes. The boy had not spoken for a year, not since his grandfather died. And now here, after this strange, quiet ceremony, he had found his voice again. Leo slowly got to his feet, his knees cracking. He didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded, putting a hand on Mikhail's shoulder and giving it a gentle squeeze. The boy didn't flinch. He looked up, and for the first time, a real full smile broke across his face. It transformed him. From the front row, Joseph was crying again, but this time they were tears of pure joy, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. The moment was broken by the sound of a single person clapping. They all turned. Anya was standing in the doorway at the back of the hall. She must have been watching the whole time. She wasn't clapping for the performance, but for what had just happened between them. Leo led Mikhail off the stage. "Come on," he said, his own voice rough. "Let's go back to the office. We have work to do." The work changed after that day. It was no longer just about preserving the past. Mikhail had found a fragment of his own voice, both in music and in words. He still spoke rarely, and only in whispers, but he would answer simple questions. Yes, no, I like that. The manuscript book on Leo's piano now had 2 sections. The first part was titled Lamentum, Elias Vogler. They worked on it carefully, with Mikhail playing and Leo writing, trying to capture the ghost of the grandfather's genius. The second part was simply titled Mikhail. These were the boy's own pieces. The simple, wondering one he played on the stage. A brighter one that sounded like sunlight on water. A playful one with a skipping rhythm. They were young, unpolished, but they were alive and growing. One afternoon, they were looking at the end of the Lamentum page. The music stopped on that unresolved, hollow chord, a musical sentence without a period. Mikhail played the last few bars, his fingers hovering over the keys where the next notes should be. He looked at Leo and whispered, "It's not finished." "I know," Leo said. "Your grandfather never finished it." Mikhail was quiet for a long time, staring at the keys. Then he slowly reached out with his right hand and played a single warm, resolving chord. It wasn't happy, but it was peaceful. It felt like an answer, like letting go. He looked at Leo, unsure. Leo felt a shiver that was not cold, but recognition. He picked up his pencil. "Show me that again," he said softly. And so, together, they began the next part of the work. Not just preserving a lost piece, but helping a new voice find its way to complete it. The boy at the piano and the man with the pencil, writing a new ending for an old lament, and a very new beginning for them both.